Voice of San Diego podcasts are sponsored in part by Hughes Marino. As a nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego depends on our members, foundations, and sponsors like Hughes Marino to provide funding to support the investigative journalism you expect from us. We are very grateful for all of our supporters, and we will recognize them during the show. Hughes Marino is San Diego's award-winning commercial real estate firm that exclusively represents tenants and buyers, never landlords. Their wide range of services include tenant representation, project and construction management, lease audit and administration, and culture and design consulting. Whether you're leasing, buying, or building, Hughes Marino can help you find the perfect space for your company to innovate and grow towards the future. Visit hughesmarino.com to learn more. And if you like our work and would like to become a sponsor, contact us at development@voiceofsandiego.org.
Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
Okay, like old times, we are broadcasting, recording from Kogo Studios, News Radio 600 Kogo. This is Scott Lewis. I'm here with my friend Andrew Keatts.
What's up, my man?
What's up, brother? And Sara Libby.
Hey, what's up?
How are you?
Doing good.
Yes, the San Diego Gas and Electric decided to come after us this week because of some of our work.
Rye reported some things unfavorable to them, and so they shut out our power.
Clearly what happened.
Cause and effect. Pretty clear.
I kid SD Genie. I kid him. It was fine. We're recording here because, we did have a disruption, but it's all okay now.
Yeah.
It's a lot going on in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of big things, big election coming, a lot of dilemmas every day, a lot of challenges. That's why I'm so proud of San Diego, that amid all of this, so proud that we were able, as a community, to ship yet another rendering of an NFL football stadium.
Really
Bravo.
Got our eyes on the ball.
Bravo.
I mean, if we can't do that, what do we got, fam?
It's our craft, really, right? Like, there's homemade tortillas in Old Town, and there's NFL stadium rendering.
Yeah, it's in our DNA.
Right? San Diego State released a vision of what a new NFL stadium what a new NFL stadium would look like if the university was able to build one. And
Hypothetically, were one to come into land that resembles or approximates in some way in size and location what is currently occupied by Qualcomm Stadium. Hypothetically, this is what a stadium that could go there might look like.
And they didn't get we've seen so many renderings. We're kind of experts on them over the last 15 years.
Drop the
Lighting is key.
Yeah, but this is one of the higher class ones.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like digital.
Yeah.
The
who did the voiceover for the one Chargers?
Val Kilmer or no?
I wish.
Wow.
God, I wish.
I think it was like
Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday.
No, who was it? It was the guy that plays 24.
Yes, Kiefer Sutherland.
Kiefer
That's
Sutherland.
What it was. Yeah.
Sorry,
Still good.
They're the
Still
same
good,
people
but man, a Val Kilmer.
No, there was no Val
voiceover.
Kilmer this time.
Honestly, now it just feels like we're JV that we only got Kiefer and not Val Kilmer.
Right. Sorry. Yes, but it was probably an
Better
8.
yet, Val Kilmer as Jim Morrison. At doing the stadium rendering description. That would be great.
Did you ever see that documentary he did about the Salton Sea?
I did not.
That was good.
No.
Oh, he's a big Salton Sea guy.
There
That
you go.
knew.
Makes perfect sense.
So yes, it was a 8 out of 10 among the renderings. But here's the funny part to me is that this is not what San Diego State is proposing to build, not what the NFL is at all interested in. And it's just that they would build something that they could build into this someday. And they decided to release this on the draft day. A lot of moving parts there. of a vision for a stadium. It's 4 or 5 steps removed from actual stadium building compared to what the other crazy renderings we've seen over the last 15 years.
Could you imagine if you got a phone call from a non-public affairs oriented friend who's like, hey, I saw that they announced some stadium rendering. What's this about?
Yeah.
Could you imagine trying to explain that?
I can actually. I get those texts.
Yeah.
And I'm like, don't know. This is not one to get excited about. The NFL is. The NFL
It's just been 18 months, so we needed to release one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I'm so proud of this community. Basically, the NFL would have to go bankrupt for it to be okay with this type of stadium again. So, all right. Don't get too excited about that. We have a lot going on in this show. So a couple of things, first of all. Go to voiceofsandiego.org/donate, please. This is our time to support. If you care about the reporting and investigative work we're doing, this is our spring campaign. We're trying to hit some pretty lofty goals, hire some more reporters, all that stuff at some point, get some good stuff out there, change rearrange, as I say, people's understanding of their community. If that's not enough, then just please help us keep going. Bonnie Dumanis was supposed to come into the podcast too, but again, SDG&E must have wanted to disrupt that, shut down our power.
Mm-hmm.
I kid SDG&E, but we're doing that next week instead. This week's interview is Omar Passons. He's running for that same seat that Bonnie Dumanis is, the county supervisor seat. Also, Andy and I were on the Kept Faith podcast this week. You might want to check that out on talking about media, sports media, and such.
Noted sports enthusiast Sara Libby still waiting for her invite.
Ooh.
It's open.
Yes, that's hello. You might want to do that, Kept Faith guys.
I don't know what the sound drop is for that, but let's imagine it just happened.
Yeah.
Look forward to talking about women's middle distance running.
They should.
SDSU at the center
Absolutely.
of such matters right now.
All right. And then another thing, we are sort of shifting things a little bit. If you're a fan of our morning report, we are not going to have Saturday mornings reports anymore. Morning reports or mornings report.
Mornings
report, I think, yeah.
And instead, we're going to be doing 5 morning reports every
Mornings report.
mornings report every week. And we're gonna sort of bring them into our production process. It's not something you guys need to necessarily care about, but hopefully the morning report will just be good and very excited.
Good.
It's been good.
Gooder,
Yeah, it's
in
good.
fact.
Yeah.
The morning's report will be gooder.
Yes.
That's what we've settled on here.
And much thanks to Randy Dotinga, who will continue to contribute, and Seth Hall, who also helped us on Thursday nights for like a long time.
Many years.
We are bringing the morning report into our own like daily production system. So a little bit different and hopefully just good. So let's just jump in. So we talked about that supervisor's race. That's going to be a big one. Ballots are coming out soon. People in their mailbox are going to not only see the ballots come in and the sample ballot pamphlets, but also tons of mail that's going to start coming. Get ready.
Got my Soccer City mail this week.
Did you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's odd. They're not even up for vote in June.
First in the
But
mailbox.
they're just like, hey, remember us? We're still here.
I would also say this isn't new, but I do think that this is the first election locally where digital ads will be more relevant than mail ads.
That's fair. Yeah, there's I mean, Soccer City's been going constantly since they qualified for the ballot. Now the anti-Soccer City thing has been going
all over the place. I remember in 2012 talking to the Labor Council with their ad campaigns, and they were telling me how they were targeting voters on Pandora.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's a cute little endeavor that you're doing on the side of things. And now like digital ads really are like driving campaign strategy.
Yeah.
It seems like, and it is something I'm looking at is the extent to which media has always obsessed over mail. You've always done your threaded collections of all the different mail pieces, and they're a well of fact checks and things like that.
Right.
KPBS does a mail watch.
Yeah,
I
please
think
take your pictures and send them to me, by the way.
But I think digital ad watch is the new thing.
Yeah, do that too. I'll thread those in. The one interesting sort of alternative campaigning that's going on is the Real Justice PAC. Is this national criminal justice reform movement. They helped get the Philadelphia district attorney elected. What's his name again?
Larry Krasner.
Krasner, yeah. And now they are targeting this race for district attorney in San Diego, probably the biggest race that will be decided in June. And they are spending a lot of time with some of these digital outreach efforts, but also with just straight text messaging. I've gotten dozens of people showing me the texts they've received from this super PAC, which is, again, odd. Usually they're coming in with like ads and stuff in a community just for TV. And this group has got this platform that we talked to the local leader about all these text messages they're sending back. So there's personal text messages. It's not some big mass text message, but it's enabled by these mass software efforts. So that's part of what's going on. We have this giant race for district attorney, and man, is it getting? It's just fire.
Yeah,
it's
hot.
It's straight for. So I moderated a debate last week at Temple Emmanuel in the Serra Mesa area, and it was Summer Stephan and Geneviéve Jones-Wright, and then Dave Myers, the sheriff candidate. But it was funny because I basically just focused on the DA the whole time and kept remembering that I had to bring him into the.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound awkward.
Bill Gore wasn't there, I guess.
No, they had a big stand-up cutout of him.
Really?
Yeah, that Myers brought in.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say.
I was like, "Are you
who
gonna
did
let
that?
him do that?" And they're like, whatever." Gore didn't even like respond to the invite, I guess. I don't know. I would want to debate all the time. That's all I would want to do. So that was just a fire debate. It was really intense on a number of different
And friendly. A lot of like compliments back and forth, talking about how much they admire each other.
Yeah, there
How
was
San Diego will win either way.
Either way, yeah. Like that was just the general subtext.
I actually asked him at the end. I'm like, we're in a temple. This is a house of peace. Can you say something you admire about the other one? And Summer Stephan said, well, I admire Geneviéve Jones-Wright for all of the how passionately she represents the criminals that she represents. And how well she does it, how much she cares about that. And I think she should continue doing that. And then he turned to Jones-Wright, and she said, I admire how well Summer Stephan knows how to say things that people like.
Like people want to hear.
Yeah, they were not even willing to.
Real House of Peace material.
Like Trump and Clinton
Yeah, they were
handled
nicer
that
to each
question
other.
better.
Clinton was
I don't even know
remarkably
if-
gracious, wasn't she? Like, well, any man that can raise kids that good or something.
And
Yeah.
Trump said like Hillary's a fighter. Like,
Yeah.
I'm impressed by how much she fights. But,
All
like,
right,
real
so-
compliments.
Probably the tensest. Well, it's hard to rate the tensest moments of this debate, but probably the tensest one came after I asked Summer Stephan about this quote that she had in the Union-Tribune's interview with her at the editorial board of the Union-Tribune, sort of describing her thoughts about leadership and the job and what's required for that to be a leader.
They should do that job. That's an honorable job. And they should do it, and they should rise through their chain from Deputy Public Defender 3 to 4, 5, to becoming a trusted team leader, to becoming a chief, proven leadership, and make reforms that way. Rather than really what is the Kardashian effect of, I can jump and be anybody, even if I haven't paid any dues or learned the skills to be a leader.
So she was talking about the public defender's office. I should have set that up a little better. And she's saying, look, if Geneviéve Jones-Wright wants to rise through the ranks there and prove that she's a leader, that's great. Otherwise, what she really did was this Kardashian effect. And, I mean, describe the Kardashian effect.
I mean, in general, it would refer to somebody who has risen to prominence despite not having any talent.
Yeah, not having earned it, right?
Yeah.
Well, Geneviéve Jones-Wright took it one step further and had a sort of a little spicier interpretation of what she was trying to say with that quote. And here's what her response was to that.
People look at me as a young person, maybe even as a person of color. And these are the things that are coloring a lot of what I'm seeing on social media coming from my opponent and her supporters. And I think we really need to take a look at that. I think we need to take a look at the dog whistling. We kind of let her slide through on the Kardashian effect. You asked her about it, it wasn't responded to. So let me respond. That is completely demeaning, and it is utterly appalling that another professional woman who professes to stand with women would compare another professional woman to a person who leaked a sex tape.
Whew. Whew. So her definition of the Kardashian effect was you leak a sex tape to get prominent.
Right. Yeah.
Well, but I think it still goes back to the basic premise that you laid out, which is somebody who hasn't earned their notoriety. And there's an embedded legitimate political hit in what Summer is saying, which is you haven't risen the ranks within your field enough to be at this level, which is okay. That's one thing we could litigate that presentation. But Geneviéve Jones-Wright is a attorney. She's an accomplished attorney.
There's sort of two.
She is not Kim Kardashian. There's just no situation in which that's a reasonable comparison.
Yeah, there's sort of two similar but different things going on here. One is, does she have the experience? And one is, does she have the leadership? And to me, those are two different things. Because if you're saying only a prosecutor who's had the experience of being in the DEA's office, which whether Summer herself has said that, certainly her supporters have suggested that.
Oh, yeah.
That to me is very limiting, and it means only a certain kind of person can qualify for that position, and it would disqualify people who've had different experiences. But if you're talking specifically about leadership, then I think it is fair to point out, whether she's risen through the ranks or held certain positions, whether it's in her own office or wherever.
Yeah. So Summer picked up on that second point about leadership, and made this. I didn't pull this actual quote, but she said, if we picked the police chief. We ended up picking the police chief that had 30 years of experience in policing and community. Now, if a large infusion of outside interests that are trying to control this election and have already opened 2 PACs to support my opponent, if they don't come in and buy this election, this community will select a district attorney based on qualifications. Because if we had just picked a police chief this way, we wouldn't just pull somebody like a patrol officer or a sergeant. The first thing that came to my mind was the school district that picked a principal to run like right away, not an administrator,
right?
Like usually,
or a school district leader from another district or something, right?
But of course, the difference is that this is an elected position.
Right.
This isn't police chief. This isn't even a school board. This is an elected position, which means that if you meet the minimum requirements by default, the Constitution says you get to run.
Right. And I think it's funny that in a way they kind of agree with each other. They're just coming at it from different directions, because I would guess that Jones-Wright sees it as a virtue that she doesn't have this experience. She's coming in as somebody with a much different perspective who would do things much differently. And so in a way, they kind of agree on that. And it's the same with the police chief. There were plenty of members of the community who did not think it was the right way to go to select someone from within the department who's been there for 30 years and will likely continue to do things the exact same way.
To me, if you are going to make the assertion that some subset of people are disqualified from running for this elected office, the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate why that is the case, because it's not written anywhere. Public defenders or defense attorneys or state legislators are allowed to run for district attorney. If you're creating a new standard that only DDAs from the current office or DDAs from elsewhere or past prosecutors are eligible to run for that position, you got to prove that up. You can't just make that blanket statement.
Yeah, she kind of tried to. She described this, and she directly went out the race question, said, I have this African-American chief deputy who moved up the ranks and kept earning the right to get more and more responsibility, and she hasn't even moved up the ranks in her own organization, in fact, her own boss, and then she drops African-American again, did not pick her to be a leader in his own office, and in fact endorsed her. It was spicy. This was a really intense debate.
Yeah, to Sarah's point, like that the leadership side is a slightly different track and a legitimate. Like, if that is the only criticism, then I don't really see much in the way that to litigate. It's just that's a fine thing to allege against your opponent.
Right. All right. Our hero of the week. Okay, so we have been involved in some sort of litigation, basically. We've been asking for records of potential educators and other people in school systems that were abusing students or otherwise bullying people. And we've been trying to get those records, and in many cases, those records are being offered, but then entities are trying to stop us from getting it. So they're filing what's called reverse PRAs.
Yeah.
So this week, tentative ruling from Judge Ronald F. Frazier held that in San Marcos and in Vista, we should get the records we seek. And so it's tentative. We'll see if it holds up. But please, that was a wonderful win on the side of transparency. But also, so these cases are supposed to come out if they're both A, substantiated, and B, substantial, which is subjective. He has decided they're both. Hopefully that holds up. All right.
A lot more to come on that.
Right. Our GOAT of the week.
You lose. Good day, sir.
This goes to everybody in town who last week, when SB1 funds, the vaunted gas tax funds, were awarded, decided to engage in what I'd call undeserved backpatting. A lot of
Celebration.
A lot of celebration, just throwing out the X millions of dollars without putting those numbers into context. Especially because had they put them into context, they would have learned that the $300-some million that we received was below what you would expect from a city the size of San Diego, a region the size of San Diego. It was less than our population representation in the state. Additionally to that, the amount of money we received was about 70% for roadways. Meanwhile, we have made these alleged commitments to transit. So don't put out the press release that just says we received $300 million, yay, without telling me what $300 million means. Is that a lot? Is that a little? Did we do good? Did we do poorly? You did poorly.
Or at least, and at least attach with it what your plan is to improve it.
Yes.
Because and it's not a matter of representation now. We have the president of the Senate representing San Diego. So we should have about as much leverage as possible. And so what are we doing wrong and how are we going to fix it?
Precisely.
All right. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for our interview with Omar Passons, and to our friends and partners at News Radio 600 Cobra. Thanks for having us.
The following is a sponsored segment from the Downtown San Diego Partnership. Voice of San Diego podcasts are sponsored in part by the Downtown San Diego Partnership. As a nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego depends on our members, foundations, and sponsors like Downtown San Diego Partnership to provide funding to support the investigative journalism you expect from Voice of San Diego. We are grateful for all our supporters, and we will recognize their support during the show. If you'd like to join them, contact development@vosd.org. I'm Kinsey Moreland, and I'm here with Yehudi Gaffin. He's a member of the Downtown San Diego Partnership and CEO of GAFCON, a firm that provides services in construction, program, and project management in complex real estate projects. Hi, Gaff.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. You're also the CEO of Protea Waterfront Development, the managing members of One Highway 1, and that's the partnership selected to develop Seaport San Diego. So that's a big project, game changer for downtown San Diego's waterfront. What are you most looking forward in coming years for downtown's waterfront development?
I think it's really creating a new district for San Diego. I've traveled quite a bit, lived in other countries, and I love San Diego. It's been amazingly good to me and my family and the business we started here, but I've always felt there's something missing downtown. We looked at moving downtown many times over the last 40 years that I've lived in San Diego. Actually pulled the trigger to do that about 16 years ago. And it's changed a lot in the 16 years, and I think it's going to change a lot going forward. And one of the things most exciting to me is to be a part of that change, to add to the fabric, to add to the activation, and to add to truly making San Diego America's finest city.
Catch the rest of our sponsored interview with GAF at the end of the show.
Okay, we are joined in the Great Voice San Diego podcast studio by Omar Passons. Welcome, Omar.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we spent some time with you last year, went over a lot of bio issues and stuff like that, so we can maybe put aside some of those things. But you've been on the campaign trail now a year and a half?
A long time. We got a long time. We got started right after our anniversary in earnest, so since about April.
Your anniversary being your wife and you?
Yeah.
Okay.
My wife and I took a little trip. It's going to be a rough ride for the next year. So,
all right. So Omar's, of course, running for County Board of Supervisors, the seat that's currently held by Ron Roberts, and running against Bonnie DeManis, Nathan Fletcher, Lori Saldana. So the big news this week, or this recently, was the issue with the vote at the Board of Supervisors about whether to join the Trump administration and oppose some of the policies that California put in place restricting the cooperation of law enforcement with federal immigration agents. You, I know, opposed that, but can you offer any insight as to specifically, maybe even from a legal point of view, why the county shouldn't get involved?
Sure. So I represented a variety of people, clients in the private sector, some of them public entities. And so it would not be unheard of to get this type of question. Should we, what are the pros and cons type of thing? So I read the lawsuit because I wanted to be able to offer something intelligent if asked. And frankly, there is no good legal reason for the county of San Diego to get involved in this lawsuit. In fact, it really just sends a bad signal to members of the immigrant communities here in San Diego County, to all of us, frankly, who think that we should be more inclusive. So there are 3 separate laws, which Voice of San Diego, to plug Voice, but did a good job of covering the 3 separate laws. And there probably are some constitutional infirmities in 2 of those, but I don't think in the one in the California Values Act, SB 54. So there's no reason to do this. No reason to jump in other than bald politics.
Mm-hmm. Signaling.
Can you talk a little bit about why you think 2 of those laws, or maybe one specifically, I'm interested to hear your take, might be a little more vulnerable? I think that was a point that you made and just alluded to, and I haven't really heard anyone articulate whether those 2 laws are more susceptible or why, and I'm interested.
Sure. So
well, can I just set the stage real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the California Values Act that you were just talking about, it's a very complex thing. It involves a lot of points. One is that California law enforcement cannot help arrest or investigate people for immigration issues. They can't report to immigration authorities as far as like that being their boss. They can only notify immigration authorities if somebody's going to be released from custody, if they if it's under a certain number of felonies, the types of felonies that they're out there, or if the information is made public in general. And then a few points about the detainer issue. You're not allowed to hold a person in jail if immigration wants them without a warrant. A lot of this just is without a warrant. So the federal government can do a lot with a warrant. And then the other 2 things you're alluding to, one says that a business can't let a immigration agency investigate their offices or their places of business that aren't public, without a warrant.
Yeah, they have to stand in the lobby.
Right, exactly. And then the third point is that this is the one I understand the least, which is that California can oversee detention centers and actually set up a budget to regulate them in some ways, right? Federal immigration.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's oversee or merely kind of inspect to ensure violations aren't happening out in the open. But it's something to that effect.
Right. So there you go.
Sure, that's a good framing. I'd say a couple things. One, I think that it's a bad idea, and I'll explain why in just a second. But it's as it relates to what the county actually has authority to do, there's so many more issues that I'm sure we'll get to. On the inspection, the last one, the inspection of detention facilities, one of the problems there, potentially anyway, is that it includes not just public detention facilities that are administered by the state, but also third party that might have a direct contract with the federal government. And I think that's an example of a potential infirmity. I'm not a constitutional scholar, so I don't want to go down the rabbit hole.
Basically, you stand with Trump then.
Nice. No, to be clear, no. No, obviously, as you asked this question, we were at the Opportunity Summit, and now it is a bad call. Trump tweeted out today his praise for Kristen Gaspar and others in their support, which I think is just awful. It's just bad. It's bad for our community.
It is interesting that the San Diego County government, the jurisdiction itself, gets this national profile all of a sudden, whereas you're running to represent that board. You wake up this morning and suddenly the President of the United States is talking about the San Diego County Board of Supervisors. Does it in any way impact the race, do you think, that people have some sort of attention on, oh yeah, outside of my city council, outside of my mayor, outside of the assembly, there's also this other government that we elect representatives to, the county of San Diego?
Well, I think we have to be a little bit cautious because Trump will tweet about anything at any time, no matter how significant or insignificant. So I don't put too much stock in what comes out off of his little thumbs. But I will say that all of the candidates running for this seat, District 4, appear to have said publicly that they oppose joining the lawsuit. So in terms of impact on the race, I think we're really in a situation where nobody is going to be making their decision about who to vote for based on the stance as it relates to the suit.
Yeah. So in terms of there not being large differences of opinion on this specific issue, I'm interested in that in other topics as well. On the California 49 race that we've been covering, one of the threads we've been trying to pull on the Democratic side is just where do these Democratic candidates disagree? On what issues can you draw clear lines between them and say this person feels this way and this person feels a different way? And it's been really hard. And basically we've found that what separates them is their background, maybe some of their priorities, but not necessarily where they stand on an issue by issue breakdown. Over the course of the campaign, where do you think that you have established and recognized clear differences of opinion between specifically the other Democrats running for the office?
One of the challenges in a question framed in that way is that it sort of presupposes that other candidates have taken positions on issues for which we could have this sort of dialogue. I would welcome the chance. I've called for fully subsidized transportation for youth aged 14 to 21 so they can get to work and get to school, as an example of something that I couldn't tell you if there's a disagreement. I think we need to scale the home visit program for expectant moms and dads, matching local resources with federal government resources, because that program works. And
what is that program?
So the maternal and child early childhood program. I'm getting the name a little bit off, but it's Administration of Children and Families has a program that puts a licensed health professional in contact with expectant moms and expectant dads, or moms and moms, or dads and dads, and says, essentially, this is how you manage stress when you're about to have a child, so you don't end up with shaken baby or child abuse. This is the importance of child development early. These types of things, this is what that health professional comes in and does. Some countries actually, I think Canada may be one, have this as just a matter of course for all parents. And so what you realize is, back to your point about carving out differences, I can't tell you with certainty if the other candidates agree that we should not only prioritize children in some nebulous way, but very specifically allocate resources. Similarly, I have a plan in our Hope for Homeless plan. We call very specifically for a board policy to be changed that would allow county government property to be used in a land deal to build homes for homeless without cost. So without charging the developer, the affordable housing developer, for that land. That's not currently the way the policy is written. I don't know if the other three Democrats in the race agree or disagree because we don't have that conversation.
Yeah. So let's talk about a couple of those policies. The transit, subsidizing transit essentially for young people. the city of San Diego had a very small pilot program to this effect briefly a few years ago. It's been the type of thing that people voice support for, certain groups lobby for it, during budget season. But for whatever reason, it hasn't particularly gained traction, or at least not enough that it happens. What is it? How would your specific vision of that policy work? How would you implement doing that, providing money for young people to take transit for free?
Sure. I think if you look at places like D.C., where if you're under, I think it's 18 or 19, you just get to ride, present an ID, and you get to ride. You don't have to go through some process of going down and getting a special card or what have you. If you get stopped by the transit people, you just show them your ID. So, oh, you're under 19, away you go. I think it really can be that simple on the user side. One of the challenges, I actually talked to MTS about this to try to find out, well, what happened with the city program that you alluded to? Mm-hmm. And one of the things they said is that was about, it was sort of had more of a focus on school-related transportation, and what I'm really talking about is across-the-board needs. So I spoke with homeless youth when I was building out our Hope for Homeless plan, and one of the things that they alluded to is that it was very, very tough to get to, a court-mandated anger management and then to work and then to their drop-in center or what have you, and so that would bring the cost down. I really do think that we could just be talking about the county either pushing SANDAG to cover that cost, or working directly with MTS and saying, look, this is we're talking about tens of millions of dollars, not hundreds or hundreds of millions. And so I think that there's an opportunity to just pay for it.
Yeah, and so the mechanism by which it would happen, so the County Board of Supervisors has seats on SANDAG's board, it has a seat on MTS's board. It doesn't have a direct role in transit beyond those two things. So you would just suggest that from your position at the board, you should make it the county's position that on SANDAG and on MTS, we should lobby for these things.
No, I think actually also the County of San Diego has a discretionary budget. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is that part of that general fund revenue should go to reimburse MTS for the purpose of this subsidized plan. So I am talking about direct as well.
So MTS would probably like that. They like money to come to them. All right. So the what else did you mentioned? Home visits, transit passes, and there was a third thing.
Hope for Homeless, the notion of changing county policy F51.
Oh yeah. So walk me through how that would work. The county would issue an RFP, and it would be understood in the RFP that the cost of land would not fall on whichever affordable housing developer won it.
Pretty close. I mean, you'd have to change. So it would require a change in what the findings are. Mm-hmm. There's a project that just got approved. I think it's Cedar and Kettner, maybe. And there's an example of where the RFP did require an acquisition cost. And if you change the board policy to say, essentially, getting 500 people off the street is a public good that serves the county's public health function, therefore that can be considered highest value as opposed to just the commercial dollar amount, then switching that policy allows, as a practical matter, when you put it out to RFP, to say, if you can demonstrate that you will be able to get X number of people off the street, then that substitutes for whatever the commercial valuation was for the land.
So are you saying that the developer would get the land or would just be able to build on it and it would still remain county land?
Well, I think this is where you got to drill in a little bit. And to be honest with you, I think it would be on a project by project basis. So if we're talking about an affordable developer who's going to do purely sort of affordable and homes for homeless, I think you could be in a situation where you say, yeah, the land is all the way in the deal. If it's a market rate developer partnering with a affordable developer, like that type of structure, I think it probably is going to require a little more depth to iron out the details. Because I think then you start getting into gift of public funds issues, and I think that's maybe deeper than from a high level policy perspective where we can go at the moment.
One of the things as we start to transition into housing supply, one of the things that you were uncomfortable taking a stand on the last time you were in was this question of the Lilac Hills development. So it has now been revived since you came in, and is being proposed for thousands of homes near the Valley Center area. Now, the reason this is interesting to a lot of us is because it does not conform to the county's general plan for zoning for the entire unincorporated area in the county. And there's several other projects. How many are we talking?
7 or 8, right?
So there's a bunch of these projects that are starting on this land that isn't zoned for housing, and they want to get it changed to zone, and that would have to go through the Board of Supervisors. At the same time, there's now an initiative being put up. I think it's called the Rural Lands Initiative.
Or Save Our San Diego
Backcountry or something.
Countryside?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this would say...
Safeguard?
Yeah. So this would say that any of those projects that don't conform to the zoning plan and the general plan would have to go to a vote of the people. Where are you on those types of projects that don't conform to the general plan?
There's a lot in there. So as a first matter, I didn't agree with Lilac Hills the last time it went through. As I understand the project as it's currently conceived, I also don't support the way that that project is being proposed. On the issue of a ballot measure, and we've had this conversation in front of the building industry with all the candidates present. I think all the candidates were present, and I don't think that a ballot measure is the appropriate way to handle general plan amendments. I think if you look at our Housing for All plan, I call for overhauling the zoning code at the county level so that the general plan, which is a pretty sound document, but there are all sorts of infirmities caused by a code that hasn't been updated in, I don't know, half a century or something. So what I think is we shouldn't ask, my friends who aren't going to pay attention until the ballot, immediately when the ballot gets there, to be making complex land use decisions. We should hold our elected officials accountable and not, you don't have the two, this is not binary. It's not just every single general plan amendment goes out the window or every single general plan amendment gets sailed through. It's more nuanced than that. And I'll be releasing, I don't have them dialed in because it's hard to distill something into a very bite-sized piece, but I'm going to release examples of 2 or 3 portions of that ballot measure that, if enacted, would create the types of problems that we don't want when it comes to growing our housing supply. So again, I haven't gotten there in terms of the explanation, but we'll post that in the next couple weeks, I think.
Yeah. So Jacqueline Arcevad, who's running for the North County Supervisor seat, when I talked to her, she had an interesting framing, an interesting construction around some of these general plan amendments, which she supports the initiative, the initiative to push everything to a countywide vote. And but her framing was an interesting way to think about it, which was right now, land that isn't zoned for dense or relatively dense development by the general plan is cheaper as a result of not coming with that entitlement. And so there's great value to be made in purchasing that land and betting on the premise that you can win 3 out of 5 county supervisor votes to get it changed.
Which is what we saw with Lilac
Hills. And that it creates this perverse incentive potentially where the land that is actually zoned and identified to be the center of population growth becomes less competitive because that reality is priced into its market value. Does that framing of it make sense to you?
It's a reasonable approach, but I think it misses an important point about the land that is currently zoned for various types of development. And we'll be able to show this, again, we'll release this hopefully in the next couple of weeks, but there are examples in the current general plan that just, even though they're technically zoned for a certain amount of housing, you can't functionally do it because of conditions of the property. You've probably had people say this sort of thing to you.
Steep hillsides or something
like
that.
Or some of the county's land that's available under the current general plan is way out in the hinterlands. Would be considered sprawl by even the most ardent, builder of projects. So I think that's something. It's one thing to say, well, you're getting a deal on the land and hoping to change it. I actually think we need to do better, even in the areas that are closer to the Rancho San Diego's, the Bonitas, et cetera, about making it easier to get the level of density that we need there so that those are attractive places to build as opposed to some of these far-flung locations.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about since then was you you had started work at the Jacobs Center for Neighborhood Development, and there was a lot of efforts there to spur housing and to do different work. And I think that's part of what you wanted to get done there. What happened with that gig, and what can you tell us about how that went?
So I can tell you that I went to the Jacobs Center for Neighborhood Innovation after spending a lot of time over the last several years working on inclusive economic growth and working on sort of workforce issues and thinking that this was an opportunity to go into a community where I went to elementary and junior high school and help put the types of programs and structural things in place that would lead to more job opportunities, more small businesses, that sort of thing. My initial job involved quite a bit of workforce development, building out a center or the framework for a center around re-engaging youth that had been disconnected from school and work. My job morphed into one that had a legal component. So there's a chunk of what happened that I was, the sort of attorney-client privilege circumstance. It just ended up being the case that I wasn't able to, after we built it out, we weren't able to implement that re-engagement center, and then my role shifted to primarily working more with the sort of community investors who had sort of bought in back at the outset. So I had a lot of very tough conversations with community members who wanted to know, hey, can we sell these things? Can we sell our interests? What's the future of the center? And it shifted based on market conditions, based on there's actually a really important environmental justice conversation that doesn't get told really about the Jacobs Center, that area. And it has to do with the levels of pollution in not just the creek, but in the soils themselves. And so there are all these other things that ended up being huge constraints on development and making it harder to get projects done. So I think it's just a big part of what stopped or delayed the progress during the time that I was there was these factors that are very, very old in nature and just made certain deals fall through.
What would it take to? That's one of the few areas of town where they're actively seeking out developers. I remember for a decade ago, I did a tour with Tony Young, who represented the area of southeastern San Diego, saying we want developers to come, we want people to build here. What does it need to spur some of that?
Well, so this again gets really, it gets in a lot of different directions. So we recently, I'm going to answer the question. We recently released an inclusive growth plan called Opportunity for All, where we talked very candidly about redlining and discriminatory housing policy in this country and its impact on stunting wealth. And I think if you go on online and look at our map, we actually show that the area that we're talking about right now had this intentional disinvestment 80 years ago. And it's not about blame. Nobody in this room, nobody listening probably was alive at the time. But the impact of that disinvestment is that you have a concentration. You had 80 years ago a concentration where there weren't as many homeowners, where there wasn't as much business investment. So now, to fast forward and answer your specific question, now we're in a position where, unfortunately, we always try to group the fully subsidized, low-income, very low-income housing stock in clusters. And we think, oh, well, that's good. That's where the people who need it most are. One of the challenges of not having more incentivized, affordable in places like where I live in North Park and in, La Jolla and Claremont, just spread out throughout the district, is that you don't get the business attraction of market rate doors in addition to subsidized doors. So I actually think what they need to do is have some market rate, get the market rate growth so that will attract the businesses, and then also reserve some of the properties for that subsidized development. And
Yeah, I mean, so it's a lot of it's like you can build the government subsidized housing in those areas, but the market rate component for grocery stores, other retail, is not going to react as aggressively for people who have less money to spend as they would for people who have more money to spend.
Right, and worse than it's not just that they don't have as much money to spend, is that there's a cap to how much money they can actually make and stay in the house, right? So it's like it's the worst situation from that standpoint, because then you hit a ceiling, and just when you are potentially the type that a Target or whatever would want to, go and cater to, they say you've got to move now. Which gets to the larger imbalance in our housing and why it's not just a subsidized problem, why we also have a entry-level housing problem in our region, brought on by, I think a failure of leadership to stand up and allow more construction, frankly.
Okay. And just to clarify, you don't necessarily support the Rural Lands Initiative that we're talking about. I don't think that's what it's called, but the Safeguard Our Backcountry.
No, I don't.
Okay. Another issue that I think you weren't certain about last year was this question of community choice aggregation, about if the county were to join the city and others in moving towards a system where San Diego residents buy their electricity, to get it delivered from SDG&E, but actually the government's in charge of contracting where that comes from, as opposed to SDG&E or SEMPRA. Have you evolved on that at all?
Well, I wouldn't say I've evolved on anything, but the reality is you actually have to do the homework, and so over the course of the almost year since I was here, I sat down with people on both sides of the issue. I read everything they put in front of me, and realized that although it will cost money, and we need to be honest with each other about that and honest with taxpayers about that, I do think it's the right choice, because it's the only way that we get to the level of clean energy that we need for our region. I mean, you look at the projections of what's happening in terms of sea level rise on the coast, and if San Diego County doesn't get more engaged, we're already starting to feel the effects of climate change, and that's just going to get worse. So this is a path forward on that, and I had candid conversations with folks who represent the utility, or indirect folks that represent the utility, and folks on the clean energy or the community choice side, and said, give me all your data. And I can't guarantee that you'll be happy with my response, but I'll tell it to you straight out.
So were you to be elected day one, you're one Democrat on a board of 5. Have you had any conversations with the sitting Republican supervisors in terms of things you could work with them on, or areas where of common ground that you would, be able to do more than just kind of wait until maybe the disposition of the board shifts over the time you'd be there?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I reject. There's a lot of framing, especially on the Democratic side, actually, this notion that, there's only one Democrat, you can't possibly engage. And the real truth is, as a lawyer who mediated, very large cases and had to come to resolution, who tried cases and had to figure out, differing political perspectives and points of view on cases, I had to work together with people who viewed things differently. I have sat down. I met with Kristen Gaspar. We talked a little bit about system-related. She has a bent towards making sure the systems work well. I think that's actually shifted a little bit, or not shifted, but she's also now interested in homelessness, and so I think there's some opportunity there. But I think the big opportunities are with Supervisor Jacob and Supervisor Cox. As you all probably know, children and youth are my passion. The largest proportion of children, fastest growing proportion, the most poor children are in Greg Cox's district. And so the opportunity to really make strides at early ages, right, is there. And I think that that's a scenario where there's a chance to have 2 votes, and then you've got to find a third, right? And similarly with Diane Jacob, one of my other really significant issues is our support for seniors, or I should say our failure to support seniors. And she had that dementia initiative. 60,000 San Diegans in our county suffer from dementia. I think that's an area where there's some common ground that we recognize. A lot of these issues are not only bipartisan, some of them are actually really nonpartisan, and it's just a matter of saying, okay, how do we get to a place where we're better supporting our young people, our seniors?
On top of the Trump lawsuit, one of the reasons the county board was in the news nationally over the last year was its response to the Hep A crisis. And as Lisa and others have reported, we saw a lot of initial foot dragging and maybe an inability to recognize the level of the crisis or bureaucratic kind of foot dragging. Is there anything that you took away from that entire episode that you would make changes, or what would you do differently in terms of that response in that episode going forward?
I think one of the biggest challenges in that dynamic actually isn't specific to hepatitis A or the flu or what have you. It's a willingness to view the role of the county government in addressing root causes of what was created, right? So the thing that I would be most inclined to change is to say, how is it that we end up in a hepatitis A crisis in the first place? And that's upstream. That's why I have a plan about increasing the amount of housing. It's why I spent time 2 weeks ago with Patty Mason from UC San Diego Health, where they're getting ready to shut down, at least for a little while, a bunch of the psych beds up in Hillcrest. That's a big issue, and it impacts potentially the next potential wave of crisis. And so from my perspective, and I think this about most things, the biggest change is a need to get people engaged earlier, get the experts, the public health professionals into the room and saying, okay, what are the conditions? What are we ripe for that we don't see? What's coming down the pike that we don't see? I think the mental health area is one of those things. And if we check our egos at the door, if we get electeds who are not committed to just, their own view of the world, I think we'll get more openness, more involvement from professionals early. One little snippet I'll add, UC San Diego Health actually had some modeling about where this was going long before it got there. And so then you'd have to ask the questions, and you're the journalist, so you'd be probably better suited to dig in on the details. But that's the question I got to ask is, if the modeling was there 6 months ahead of time, why didn't we get to a place where we were ringing that bell much earlier?
You've talked a little bit about your emphasis on youth, and I want to go back to that real quick. It seems like it's orbiting around the idea of universal preschool for all, some sort of concept. Do you support preschool for all?
Yes, but that oversimplifies a bigger issue. Because when we wait till preschool, Emily Badger did a really interesting piece on this that shows the gap that exists at age 3. So if we wait till preschool, we've waited too long.
So preschool, you mean by 4?
Yeah. No. So Mayor de Blasio is in the process of rolling preschool back to 3. So what I'm saying is in that if we wait till kids are 3 or 4 to get these interventions, I think that's actually too late in many cases.
So you support some program that would allow every child in San Diego to go to preschool starting at age 3, and if they couldn't afford it, to help them get there.
I do. And I'll say that one of the things that's true and not sexy about these types of things, I used to work for the federal government. It's a huge bureaucracy. And you can't just walk in on day one and say, wave your hands and something changes. In my view, the right solution is probably not going to be known for 6 months or a year after getting into office, because you have to take the time with the HHSA, Health and Human Services of the world, the land use, the Community Services Division, the community partners, and figure out where our system can shift. A lot of, as you pointed out the last time I was on the show, a lot of what the county does is either mandated or funded by the state, but it's not all of it. And the question is whether through better cannabis policy or through an honest conversation with voters about actual taxation, whether there are things that we can do to get more revenue locally geared towards our young people.
Did you just hint at pot for preschool? Sounds like a good message.
Nice.
No?
It would be a confusing one, but if you could say, sit down for a second, I promise this will make sense. I'm talking about a funding mechanism, not a direct.
Solano County. Take a look. This is not new. I can't claim any special thing here. This is happening in other parts of the state right now.
Okay. So let me just be clear. You, when becoming a county supervisor, would work on a plan to get all kids over 3 years old into preschool for free if they couldn't afford it.
Yes, but to take it a step further, and the early high quality childcare. It is making sure the full net from 0 until they enter kindergarten is strong for every child in every community.
Okay.
That's the vision.
Do you have any idea how to get there?
Well, I mean, I've just alluded to a couple.
Well, that
of
was a lot of acronyms and stuff.
Pieces.
I mean,
so take for example our Housing for All plan,
mm-hmm.
right? One of the things one of the ways that the County of San Diego gets its funding is through property tax revenue.
Yeah.
So solving one problem on the one hand, our housing crisis, by allowing much more housing to be built, increases our property tax revenue base. Now, the reason that I can't say with certainty that that'll get us from point A to point B is because, like I said, there's an awful lot of detail, of time with the budget folks, et cetera, to get to the exact dollar amount. I mean, it's a wildly expensive number if we were talking about fully subsidizing every child from 0 to 5. So what I'm talking about at the moment is saying conceptually, we need to figure out how to support every child. How we get there, whether that's tiered, whether it's partially funded from property tax revenue, partially funded from cannabis, all of those things are still have to be ironed out. But it's about conceptually realizing that you get equity at birth, not at 20.
Okay.
Let's talk about cannabis policy. You alluded to the county's position right now is that there's no places in the area that they control land use for where legal pot dispensaries can exist. Nonetheless, as we've documented, there are places that are being shut down and reopened faster than that process can take place. So what should the county do in terms of allowing for the sale and taxation of marijuana?
Well, I think they just voted recently a moratorium on or a sunset on the medicinal side, which I think is just exactly wrong, right? And so in my view, a much less restrictive policy is a better approach. It allows us to potentially pay for the additional, public safety research that we need. If somebody, I can't remember who it was now, at some point someone asked me, it was the Union-Tribune interview, asked me, the sheriff says that they don't have the resources to enforce the illegally opening dispensaries. And my view is one of the ways that you get the resources to enforce those is by making sure that there are legal dispensaries available. So I think that's part of the way that you change it, but I don't want to get stuck on just dispensaries, because what we're really talking about, as I sort of throw the land use hat back on for a second, if we overhaul the zoning code to make the rest of the distribution chain more properly available, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, we may be able to get to a place where we sort of integrate that chain within the county instead of having to go to northern farms, et cetera. Now, I don't know. I mean, there are some, I think we had a candidate forum that Scott moderated not too long ago. I think they're lifting the acreage cap on the size of farms that can participate, which could have, I think, some negative impacts for San Diego County farms. But I'd be interested to get, Eric Larson from the Farm Bureau's take on that point. But fundamentally, I just think it's almost like this is one of those areas where we're going 180 degrees in the wrong direction.
I have two campaign issues I wanted to get out and make sure you had a chance to talk about. One of them, you took a little issue with my description of some tension between you and Nathan Fletcher, another Democrat running in the race. I had described, because you had been a supporter of his when he ran for mayor, and I described a tweet that you had later this year or last year where you said, you guys had gotten into it with Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, his wife, and I had described that your tweet as saying that you had felt deceived by Nathan since when you supported him, and you said no, that's not the case. Do you want to explain how that should be properly described?
Sure, and I think to be fully clear about the framing of the question. A sitting state legislator said two things that were just patently untrue, and nobody, not the media, not anybody else, said, "Hang on a second, can you demonstrate prove those claims?" No, it became took on a life of its own, and instead it was, a different framing in terms of your rendering, etc. But as to Nathan specifically, he didn't deceive me. I was very involved civically in San Diego, but had not been particularly involved from a electoral politics standpoint. And so I heard from a guy who was, articulate and had what seemed like a lot of really good ideas. And so I didn't know at the time that I supported him that he had both voted to gut the state's welfare system and bragged about it or made reference to it in that recording that Liam put up on some website, Liam Dillon. That's what I was talking about. It's not that Nathan, hid that. I didn't go investigate every single position. I looked at him and Filner and I don't remember who else, but in any case, and based on what I knew, we said, oh, this seems like the right call. So it's not about he was deceptive in that regard. It's just
you learned more about.
Yeah, that's something I didn't know. I didn't know about some of the stuff that has come out now with the NRA, and that it just wasn't on my radar.
And the other campaign issue I wanted you to have a chance to talk about was you've been criticized a little bit for how much of your campaign funds you've spent, and as of the last reporting period, you didn't have any cash on hand, but you had a really pretty successful fundraising period comparably in the beginning. And I know that we've talked about how campaigns are funded, how they're operated. Well, what's your take on how it went and how's it going?
You said I've been criticized, so I haven't seen that published. I mean, where's that criticism?
I saw a tweet from Umberto Peraza, I think it was. Maybe it was a subtweet.
He actually wasn't. He called me about it. He wasn't talking about my campaign.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I've received maybe a half dozen questions about it from political operative types.
Okay. So stipulating that maybe not publicly, but in some context, somebody has said that to you. Here's what I would say. There's no training with the Democratic Party that says, is there an exemption for how much you pay your campaign workers, or do you need to pay them, according to all the other wage and hour laws? Which it turns out that is the case, and that's what we did, and that's what we still do. There, when you don't have the infrastructure that comes with institutional establishment support, you've got to create that on your own, which I had to do, and So I am not, I'm comfortable with the fact that I pay the two people who work for me an appropriate wage for the work that they do. And that doesn't happen all the time in campaigns. In fact, it often doesn't happen. I would like to have spent less on a campaign building, but there was nobody to give me a deal on the campaign location. The other thing that I would say about it is, if I had waited until now or March to start spending money to raise name ID, everybody would have just already conceded that this race was about some career politician or another ascending to another spot. We started knocking on doors and getting mail and doing those sorts of things last June when people said, oh, nobody cares about this race. Nobody's thinking about it. But people were thinking about homelessness from the very first day I knocked on a door. People were asking about mental illness and whatnot. They just didn't know that it was a county role. And so for me to go out there and say, hey, I grew up in this, in Claremont, I went to elementary school in this community, and I have the substantive background, that resonated with people. And so I'm, that's, it just ended up being the way that I had to strategize and run this campaign.
Are you saying you played by rules that others aren't playing by? You played by rules to pay and compensate people fairly that others aren't?
Well, I can say this. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen a journalist do this story, so I don't know if the current set, either now or in their past campaigns, have paid appropriately, if they've 1099 somebody who's supposed to be paid.
Well, this is a national discussion. There's a whole discussion about allowing workers on campaigns to unionize because of this very issue, that they're pushed too hard, that sort of thing.
No, sure. So when I wrote a post on my site about campaign stealing from their employees, and it was based on having interviewed several people to work for me who were like, wait, what? You're going to actually, pay the, workers' comp and pay. I mean, that doesn't go to the employee, but we're asking people to get out and knock on doors. I remember a few years back, one of the guys volunteer on Scott Peters' campaign, hurt his shoulder, running from a dog or something. It was a volunteer and it was fine. It's not saying anything against Scott. But my point is, these things happen, and that's why work comp insurance exists. There's a certain level. Hell, progressives fought for the rights, a certain baseline level of income. And so I said from beginning, I'm going to pay that. And that's the way that goes. And so I don't know locally if everybody is above board in this campaign. Several career politicians have hired people before. I ask them, did they pay all their other races that they have? Did they pay appropriately? I don't know.
Do you feel like you were treated fairly in the endorsement process by the Democratic Party?
Fairness is a difficult thing. What I would say is I don't think the process was as transparent as they claimed it was. And very specifically now, I don't need to be ambiguous or what have you. There are two examples. The first is, and this gets into the weeds a little bit, but to declare a race strategic and critical, which would allow the party to move it forward, they had to go to this subcommittee, basically, and put that on the agenda. At the time that they did that, put it on the agenda just to consider it, they knew that I was in the race. Anybody could have said, hey, come make your case before it goes up to the Central Committee and then comes back to us for a vote. Like, let's do it when it actually matters. Instead, nobody said anything. And they said, oh, well, you're not a member of the subcommittee. We didn't have any duty to let you know. And then we don't get a chance until a party leader is saying, we tried diversity before and it didn't work, so we shouldn't be. That shouldn't be our litmus test.
Who said that?
One of the party leaders at the subcommittee meeting. I mean, you have to ask. I mean, the more important part is that it was a room full of 60 people, and nobody said, "Hey, hang on a second."
I do think it matters if there's a party leader whose opinion is that we've tried diversity before, and it
seems like a big one.
What? Yeah, I have a couple questions about that. Do you know what that was in reference to?
It was I guess Richard Barrera had run for the county board of supervisors before. I mean, what I can remember of it is now whatever that was, a year ago or something. And so one of the members of the committee, one of the few who stood up and said, "Hang on, this is the most diverse district in the county. We've got 2 African-American men running. We've got a Latina woman running. It is true, as evidenced by our president and countless other electeds, that you can be of a different nationality and represent people, right? That's true. Yet and still, I think there are those that feel like, myself as an African-American man, that it shouldn't be reduced to like generically trying diversity. It should be about who the people are. But the other thing, back to the point about fairness, is that I'll say, in maybe February of last year, I had just barely pulled papers. I wasn't even really doing much of a campaign because I promised not to be public. At home, I said, we won't go public and start doing things until after that anniversary trip I mentioned. And the chair of the party actually tried to talk me out of running at that point in favor of potentially supporting another candidate. There were no other candidates in the race at that time. So from my perspective, I think if the Democratic Party, the local party now, wants to be inclusive across the board, then it should do that, right? It should open its arms and say, you know what, this is our process, and you don't have to be specially connected to powerful interests to participate. We want you at the table. We want you engaged. And there have been, to be clear, plenty of people, members within the structure, activists in the community, in the Democratic Party, et cetera, who have been inclusive and supportive and positive and focused on the issues. But in terms of answering your question, that's in the rearview mirror. That was a year ago. Nothing to do about it now. But those are the types of things that I think the party, if it wants to be serious about inclusion, should look at changing in the future.
Omar Passons, County Supervisor candidate. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now back to our sponsored interview with GAFCON CEO and Downtown San Diego Partnership member Yehudi Gaff-Gaffin. So, like you said, you have a ton of experience living and working along the waterfronts across the globe, really. So what is special now about San Diego's waterfront, and what could be special in the future?
I think what's special to me, and this relates to the Seaport San Diego site, is that there aren't many places in the world in an urban environment that you have a site that big. It's 70 acres. 70 acres is a big piece of land. Some people forget or don't realize that Seaport Village is only 13 acres of that 70 acres that's known as Seaport San Diego. So the opportunity to actually revision a parcel of that size in that location is very, very unique and very, very special, and I think has a tremendous potential to be transformative for downtown. The site's been named the 100% corner before we got involved, and I think it was an architect who was originally brought in to look at the waterfront, and they determined that that site is the 100% corner within the bay, within San Diego. And I truly believe that it is, and it has that potential to change all of downtown.
Right. I mean, it's such a beautiful, just the natural beauty of that site is one thing. The accessibility, it's, easy to get to. Hopefully it'll be even easier to get to in the future. Protea Waterfront Development is, leading the project, or one of the managing members. This is a mega project. Lots of people are watching it, interested in it. With so many stakeholders involved, how do you approach that? How do you satisfy everyone?
Yeah. It's probably one of the more difficult aspects of this project is building that consensus, because this site, it's a public project, although we call it a public-private partnership, although there's a private developer that's going to be building it. The impacts on everyone around it are huge. So I have learned through my 40 years in this business that ignoring stakeholders is a recipe for disaster. Ignoring the community that you build within is a recipe for disaster. And when this opportunity came up, I think one of the reasons we were selected was the amount of work we put into reaching out to the stakeholders in an honest way. A lot of people talk about outreach and community engagement, but it's very often just done as a foil to say we did it. But I think people are not stupid. It becomes very apparent very quickly. So I remember in the late 70s when I came to San Diego, it was a vibrant fishing industry. Tuna Harbor, which is part of our project, was the heart of the U.S. tuna fishing fleet. And over the holiday period, I remember vividly, you didn't give bottles of wine. You really gave cans of tuna that you had your logos put onto, and you gave a box of canned tuna to people. And the boats were lined up, side by side in Tuna Harbor. And then with regulation and labor laws and other issues, the tuna fleet essentially disappeared. But those fishermen are still here, and they are an important part of our community. They're an important part of our history, and they have been pretty much sidelined. So we felt that here was an opportunity to really work with them to celebrate what they have done, but not what they had in their history, but also the potential future for the fishing industry in San Diego. We worked with the downtown residents, so we really felt that we had to involve community, make this project their project, not just our project. And to me, that was one of the prime reasons that I think ultimately we were selected.
So where are we in the design process? Is there a conceptual design out there? It's still evolving. Just update us on what might become in the design.
It's definitely still evolving. I'm a believer that nothing good comes out of the first shot. I often think about when you write an essay or you write
they're terrible.
A white paper. They're terrible. You think it's great the night you wrote it, and then you read it the next morning, and it's, wow, this is terrible. So whether it's art or whether it's a skill set, I think it takes time. This started way back. The design of this site started before we got involved. It started with the Port of San Diego coming up with this concept for their vision, for their plan for the bayfront, which is now moving into what's known as the Port Master Plan Update. A very visionary effort by this Port Commission, who have truly been an amazing partner to work with. And we're hard at work. We're working every single day with a very big team to try and address options and alternatives. And we're hopeful that within the next few months we'll be able to unveil the next iteration of the design. One thing we've committed to is that we won't bait and switch the port. I think the big worry was, you've submitted a great program to us with great components. The worst thing I think we could do is that we basically change all that. So the commitment we've made is that the core of our program will stay intact. We may add to it if we have better ideas, if new initiatives come forward, but we won't bait and switch where we'll actually start reducing the program and what we had submitted.
So what are some of the design elements that people are most excited about already, or some of those core programmatic things that you have?
I think there are a few things. I think the idea of an observation platform where many people have never seen San Diego from 500 foot up in the air. If you can't afford $30 martinis and in a sky bar, or afford a penthouse that overlooks the ocean, many San Diegos have never seen that incredibly majestic view.
Right.
So I think that observation platform and the ability for people to get up to that level to experience what that may be like. I think the second thing we hear a lot about is the diversity of hospitality experience. So we had submitted 4 price points for hotel rooms on the water, starting at the low end with a hostel where you could rent beds in a shared room, obviously gender separated, to a micro hotel where the rooms were designed more like cruise ship cabins, small rooms, but obviously less expensive than a full service.
Yep.
The third level up was a full service hotel, which there are many on the waterfront. The convention style hotels, we probably think of them as 4-star hotels. Those were the 3 price points in hospitality. We're now looking at a potentially a 4th one, which would be a luxury hotel on the waterfront. And what we've determined when guests come in and they say, I really want to stay at a special place on the water, and they say, where can I stay in San Diego? You think about it, and to be honest, I don't think there are any. And we feel that this location deserves something like that. So we're looking at that alternative, either to replace the full-service hotel or potentially a 4th hospitality price point.
So I have to ask, if my 3-year-old and 5-year-old were in the room right now, they would ask you 2 questions. 1, will there still be ice cream? And 2, will they be able to ride a carousel?
But the answer is yes to both of those, and many, many, many more. I think many more things to do. One of the areas we're really focusing on is the public realm and making it exciting for everyone, from your kids, as you mentioned, to millennials, to older people, to retired people, to travelers, to tourists. And we're actually starting to work on a storyboard which talks about a day at Seaport from all those different perspectives. So if you did have a 2 or 3-year-old, what would they do at Seaport if they came there for a morning or a day? And I think it enables us to tease out that experience journey for these different people and to start thinking about where gaps may exist. So it's the public realm that creates the value ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, one of the common complaints that comes up about downtown San Diego and the waterfront is that locals don't access it enough, that it's been walled off. There's a convention center and there's maybe a lot more geared toward tourists. And it sounds like you're saying this project is going to completely flip the script.
That's totally our intention, is to make this the go-to place. If you visit California, people are going to say you have to go and see Seaport.
All right. Well, Gaff, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.